The gunshot echoed across the plains like an omen, startling Beatrice Ashton from her slumber as dawn barely cracked the horizon. Her hands trembled as she pushed back her honey-brown hair, her heart racing in her chest. She had only been in Redemption Creek, Colorado for 3 days, and already trouble had found its way to her doorstep. The year was 1878, and the West was still wild enough to make a woman traveling alone seem like a curiosity at best, a target at worst. Beatrice had come from Boston with dreams of opening a proper schoolhouse in this growing settlement, but those dreams seemed distant this morning as another shot rang out, closer this time. She hurriedly dressed, abandoning the delicate lace nightgown for a practical brown dress, and cautiously peered through the window of her rented room above the general store. In the dusty main street below, a man lay sprawled in the dirt, blood seeping from his chest. Standing over him was a tall figure, revolver still smoking in his hand. "You took your last breath as a thief, Rollins," the man called out, his voice carrying in the morning stillness. Beatrice gasped as he turned toward her window, as if sensing her gaze. Even from a distance, she could see his face was all hard angles, weathered by sun and hardship. He wore a worn Stetson that shadowed eyes as blue as a summer sky, and a star pinned to his vest glinted in the rising sun, Sheriff Vincent Porter. She had heard his name whispered with both respect and fear since her arrival. A former Texas Ranger who had brought law to a lawless town through sheer force of will and lightning-fast reflexes. As their eyes met briefly across the distance, Beatrice felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. 3 hours later, Beatrice was arranging books in the corner of the mercantile she'd convinced Mr. Holbrook to let her use temporarily for classes when the bell above the door jingled. She turned to find Sheriff Porter filling the doorway, his hat now in his hands. "Miss Ashton," he said with a nod, his voice deep and resonant, "I reckon I owe you an apology for the disturbance this morning, not the kind of welcome we aim to give newcomers." Beatrice straightened her spine. "Sheriff Porter, I wasn't aware that public executions were part of the welcoming committee's duties." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "That man shot a family traveling west, took their horses and left them stranded. The husband died of his wounds yesterday." Beatrice felt the color drain from her face. I didn't know. No reason you should." His eyes, she noticed, were even more striking up close, rimmed with fine lines that spoke of squinting into harsh sunlight and distant horizons. "I hear you're planning to start a school." "Yes," she said, recovering her composure. "Every child deserves an education, even here." Something in his expression softened slightly. "Noble cause, madam, but Redemption Creek's a rough place for a Boston lady. Folks here are suspicious of outsiders bringing Eastern ideas." Beatrice lifted her chin. "I'm made of sterner stuff than I appear, Sheriff." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt that, Miss Ashton." He settled his hat back on his head. "Just the same, if you need anything, my office is across the street." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Sunday service starts at 10. Might help folks warm up to you if you attended." With that, he was gone, leaving Beatrice with the lingering scent of leather and gunpowder, and an unsettling awareness that Sheriff Vincent Porter was unlike any man she had ever known. The week passed in a blur of preparation and setbacks. Beatrice tried to focus on readying her makeshift classroom, but found herself watching the sheriff's office more often than she cared to admit. She saw him sometimes, striding purposefully down the street, nodding to townspeople, always alert, always alone on Friday afternoon. As rain clouds gathered ominously on the horizon, Beatrice was startled by a commotion outside. A weathered wagon pulled by 2 exhausted horses rolled into town, driven by a man whose face was etched with grief and exhaustion. In the back, 2 small boys huddled together, their clothes dirty and torn. Sheriff Porter emerged from his office immediately, helping the man down from his seat. Even from a distance, Beatrice could see the man was injured, favoring his left side as he spoke urgently to the sheriff. Curiosity and concern drove Beatrice outside, where she caught fragments of their conversation. "Comanche raid. Wife didn't make it." Heading for my brother's place near Denver. Vincent Porter's face was grim as he supported the wounded man. Doc Miller will tend to you. Those boys need food and rest. Got no money to spare, the man said, his voice breaking. Worry about that later, the sheriff replied, then noticed Beatrice hovering nearby. Miss Ashton, could you? Of course, she said without hesitation, moving toward the wagon. The two boys, one about 6 and the other perhaps 8, regarded her with wary eyes. Hello there, she said gently. My name is Miss Beatrice. Would you like something to eat? The younger boy's lip trembled, but the older one straightened. Yes, madam, thank you, madam. Such fine manners, she smiled, helping them down from the wagon. What are your names? I'm Samuel, the older boy said. This here's my brother Daniel. Pa says we're going to live with Uncle Robert now. Beatrice's heart twisted at the stoic way he delivered this news, knowing what tragedy lay behind it. Well, Samuel and Daniel, let's get you both some hot food and perhaps a bath. As she led them toward the small restaurant at the end of the street, she felt Sheriff Porter's eyes on her back, and somehow his silent approval warmed her more than it should have. That evening, after ensuring the boys were comfortable in a room at the boarding house that the kind-hearted proprietress, Mrs. Landry, had offered at no charge, Beatrice found herself face-to-face with Vincent Porter once more. Their pa's not doing well, he said without preamble. Doc says the infection might take him if the fever doesn't break by morning. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Those poor children, to lose both parents so close together. Life out here can be cruel, he said, his expression unreadable. Their uncle's been telegraphed, but it'll be at least a week before he can get here. The boys can stay with me until then, Beatrice offered impulsively. Vincent's eyebrows rose. That's mighty generous, Miss Ashton, but they're a handful, especially with what they've been through. I came west to teach children, Sheriff. I think I can manage 2 boys for a week. A thoughtful look crossed his face. Call me Vincent, he said suddenly. If you're going to be looking after Jake Miller's boys, we'll be seeing a lot of each other. The intimacy of using his first name made her cheeks warm. Then you must call me Beatrice. Beatrice, he repeated, and somehow her name in his mouth sounded different, special. It suits you. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something Beatrice couldn't quite name. Then Vincent cleared his throat. I should get back to Jake. If anything changes, I'll let you know. She nodded, watching him walk away, his shoulders broad beneath his worn duster, wondering why her heart seemed to follow him. By Sunday morning, Jake Miller had succumbed to his wounds, leaving his sons truly orphaned. Vincent broke the news to the boys himself, with Beatrice by his side. Samuel's face had gone blank with shock, while Daniel had buried his face against Beatrice's skirts and sobbed. Their uncle will be here by next weekend, Vincent told her later, as they stood outside the room where the exhausted children had finally fallen asleep. Said he'll take them to his ranch in Colorado. At least they have someone, Beatrice said softly, but I worry about tomorrow. It's Sunday and I promised to take them to church, but she hesitated. Their clothes are practically in tatters. They've nothing suitable for services. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from the usually composed lawman. Town's got no proper store for children's clothes, nearest one's in Boulder City. Beatrice's mind raced. What about material? Does Mr. Holbrook have fabric I could purchase on a Sunday? Vincent shook his head, and he's heading to church himself. A determined look crossed Beatrice's face. Then I'll have to make do with what I have. Vincent watched her curiously. What are you thinking? I have curtains, she said decisively, in my room. Heavy velvet ones that came with the lodgings. They're old, but the fabric is still good. Curtains, Vincent repeated, a hint of amusement in his eyes. You aim to make clothes from curtains? I do, she nodded firmly. My mother taught me to sew, and I've made my own dresses since I was 12. I can certainly fashion 2 simple outfits for the boys by morning. Something like admiration flickered in Vincent's eyes. You continue to surprise me, Beatrice Ashton, she smiled, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. I'll take that as a compliment, Sheriff Porter. Vincent, he corrected softly, his gaze lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary before he tipped his hat. I look forward to seeing your handiwork tomorrow." Beatrice worked through the night, her fingers flying as she cut and stitched the deep burgundy velvet into two small vests and pairs of trousers. The material was richer than anything typically worn in Redemption Creek, but she reasoned that church clothes should be special. By dawn, she had completed her task, even adding small details like proper pockets and buttons salvaged from one of her own dresses. When she presented the clothes to Samuel and Daniel at breakfast, their eyes widened in wonder. "These are for us." Samuel asked incredulously, running his small fingers over the soft velvet. "They're so fancy," Daniel whispered, already struggling to put his vest on over his nightshirt. "Every boy should have proper Sunday clothes," Beatrice said, helping Daniel with the buttons. "And you two are going to be the handsomest gentlemen in church today." And they were. When Beatrice walked into the small white church with a boy on each hand, heads turned. The burgundy velvet gleamed richly in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, and both boys stood a little taller, pride temporarily overshadowing their grief. Vincent, seated near the back, felt his breath catch at the sight of them. Not just because of the remarkably well-crafted clothes the boys wore, but because of the woman between them. Beatrice's simple blue dress was nothing extraordinary, but the kindness that had driven her to sew through the night for two orphan children illuminated her from within, making her more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen. As they slid into the pew beside him, Vincent leaned close to whisper, "I've never seen finer Sunday clothes in all my days." Beatrice's answering smile warmed something long cold within him, and Vincent Porter realized with sudden clarity that this Eastern schoolteacher had somehow slipped past his carefully constructed defenses in just 1 week. After the service, as the congregation gathered outside, many townsfolk approached Beatrice to introduce themselves, drawn by her obvious care for the Miller boys. The burgundy velvet clothes had become an unexpected conversation piece, breaking down barriers that might have taken months to overcome otherwise. "You've made quite an impression," Vincent noted as they walked back toward town, the boys running ahead to examine a lizard on the dusty path. "It seems all I needed was 2 charming young men and some repurposed curtains," Beatrice laughed, the sound light and musical. Vincent's expression grew serious. "It's more than that. You saw a need and filled it without hesitation. That speaks to your character." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This town needs someone like you, Beatrice." The implication that he might need someone like her two hung unspoken between them, but Beatrice felt it nonetheless. Their eyes held for a long moment before Samuel's excited shout broke the spell. "Miss Beatrice, Sheriff, come see what Daniel found." Vincent offered his arm, and Beatrice took it, feeling the solid strength of him as they walked together toward the boys. Something was building between them, something neither had expected but both were beginning to welcome. The next few days established a routine. Beatrice cared for the boys during the day, beginning their education in her makeshift classroom while also preparing them for the journey to their uncle's ranch. Vincent stopped by each evening, sometimes bringing small gifts, a wooden toy he'd whittled, candies from the general store, a book of adventure tales that had once belonged to him as a boy. On Wednesday evening, after the boys were asleep, Vincent lingered longer than usual, his hat in his hands, an uncharacteristic nervousness about him. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what happens after Robert Miller takes the boys." Beatrice's heart quickened. "Oh. You came here to start a school," Vincent continued, pacing slightly. "But the town council's been dragging their feet about approving a permanent building or salary." "Yes, that's true," Beatrice acknowledged, wondering where this was leading. Vincent stopped pacing and faced her directly. "I own land just outside town, 10 acres with a small house that I've been fixing up when time allows. It's nothing fancy, but it has a large front room that would make a fine classroom." Beatrice stared at him, stunned by the implication. "Vincent, are you offering me a place for my school?" "I'm offering you more than that," he said quietly, his blue eyes intense. "I'm a solitary man, Beatrice, Have been since my wife died of fever 5 years ago. Didn't think I'd ever want companionship again, but then you arrived and something changed." Beatrice's breath caught as he took a step closer. "I know it's sudden," he continued. "Some might say foolish, but I've seen enough of life to know when something rare comes along." He took her hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises yet, just a chance to court you properly. To see if what I feel, what I hope you might feel too, could grow into something lasting." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. In just over a week, this man had shown her his strength, his integrity, and glimpses of a tenderness few were privileged to see. "I would like that very much, Vincent," she whispered. The smile that transformed his face made him look younger, unburdened. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. When they parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected you, Beatrice Ashton." "Nor I you, Vincent Porter," she replied, her heart fuller than she had ever known it could be. Saturday brought both joy and sadness as Robert Miller arrived to claim his nephews. The boys had grown attached to Beatrice, and saying goodbye proved difficult, especially for young Daniel, who clung to her skirts and sobbed. "You'll write to me?" Samuel asked solemnly as he stood in his burgundy Sunday best, insisting on wearing the clothes Beatrice had made for their departure. "Every week," Beatrice promised, straightening his little velvet vest. "And you must tell me all about your uncle's ranch and the adventures you'll have there." Robert Miller, a kind-faced man with the same sandy hair as his nephews, shook Vincent's hand firmly. "Sheriff, I can't thank you enough for all you've done. And you, Miss Ashton," he turned to Beatrice, "my brother would be grateful knowing his boys were in such good hands during this terrible time." "They're wonderful children," Beatrice said, wiping away a tear. "You'll take good care of them, I know." As the wagon pulled away, both boys waving until they were out of sight, Vincent slipped his arm around Beatrice's waist, a public gesture that raised a few eyebrows among the townspeople who had gathered to see the children off. "They'll be all right," he said softly. "Robert seems like a good man." "I know," Beatrice nodded, leaning into his strength, "but I'll miss them terribly." Vincent turned her to face him, heedless of the curious onlookers. "How about I show you that house I mentioned?" "The one with the room that would make a fine schoolroom," Beatrice smiled through her tears. "I'd like that very much." The house was indeed small but solidly built, situated on a gentle rise that offered views of the mountains to the west and the town to the east. Inside, Vincent had already begun preparations, with a corner of the main room filled with lumber that would become desks and a chalkboard propped against one wall. "It's perfect," Beatrice breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "But Vincent, I couldn't possibly accept such generosity without making it proper." He finished for her, a glint in his eye. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I telegraphed Denver 3 days ago, asked them to send this on the next stage." Beatrice's heart nearly stopped as Vincent opened the pouch and a simple gold ring with a small sapphire fell into his palm. "Too fast?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know it hasn't even been 2 weeks, but yes," Beatrice interrupted. Vincent blinked. "Yes, it's too fast." "Yes, I'll marry you," she clarified, laughing through sudden tears of joy. "Some things don't need years to know, Vincent. Some things you just know." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her, and when Vincent kissed her this time, it was with the passion of a man who had found his home after years of wandering. Their wedding 3 weeks later was the social event of the year in Redemption Creek. The entire town turned out, along with Robert Miller and his nephews, who had traveled back especially for the occasion. Samuel and Daniel, once again in their burgundy velvet Sunday clothes, proudly served as ring-bearers. Beatrice wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace sent by her sister in Boston. But her most treasured accessory was a handkerchief made from a small scrap of the same burgundy velvet as the boys' clothes, which Vincent had secretly commissioned from the town's seamstress as a wedding gift. "To remember how it all began," he whispered as he pressed it into her hand before the ceremony. As autumn turned to winter, The Porter home became exactly what Beatrice had dreamed of, both a school for the children of Redemption Creek and surrounding farms, and a warm, loving home where she and Vincent built their life together. The town council, seeing the success of Beatrice's teaching and influenced by Vincent's standing in the community, finally approved an official salary for her position. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Beatrice presented Vincent with her own special gift, a new burgundy velvet vest she had ordered from Denver, along with news that made his eyes fill with uncharacteristic tears. A baby. He whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "You're certain?" Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. She nodded, joy radiating from her. "By next summer we'll be parents." Vincent gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When he finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands. "I thought my life was set on its course before you arrived, just me and this badge keeping the peace until some faster gun came along. And now," Beatrice asked softly. "Now I have everything I never knew to wish for," he said simply. "A wife I adore, a school full of children who look up to me as something other than just the law, and soon, our own child to love." As they sat together by the fire that night, Beatrice couldn't help but marvel at how a journey that began with uncertainty had led to such profound happiness. From the window, she could see the church where she had first walked in with Samuel and Daniel in their curtain-made Sunday clothes, never imagining that simple act of kindness would set her life on an entirely new path. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Curtains," she said with a smile. "And how sometimes the most unexpected materials can be transformed into something beautiful when shaped by caring hands." Vincent's laugh was warm and rich. "Like a Boston schoolteacher and a weather-beaten lawman." "Exactly like that," Beatrice agreed, resting her head on his shoulder and placing her hand over the spot where their child grew. "Exactly like that." Their happiness only grew with the arrival of twin boys the following summer, whom they named James and Thomas. As they grew, Beatrice often told them the story of the two orphaned boys whose Sunday clothes she had sewn from burgundy curtains, and how that simple act of kindness had led her to their father and the life she cherished. Samuel and Daniel Miller remained part of their lives, visiting often as they grew into fine young men under their uncle's care. And when James and Thomas were old enough for their first proper church clothes, Beatrice surprised them with vests made from the same deep burgundy velvet, ordered specially from Denver, a tradition that would continue with each child born to the Porters in the years that followed. Vincent's land expanded as Redemption Creek prospered, eventually including not just their home and school but a proper ranch where he raised horses after retiring his sheriff's badge. Beatrice's school grew as well, eventually moving to a purpose-built building in town, though she never forgot the humble beginnings in their front room. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and countless friends, Vincent presented Beatrice with a memory quilt, secretly commissioned from the local quilting circle. At its center was a square of the original burgundy curtain fabric, preserved all these years, surrounded by scraps from their children's clothes, wedding attire, and other meaningful textiles from their shared life. "You took an old curtain and made it into something that changed lives," Vincent said as Beatrice traced the fabrics with trembling fingers. "Just as you took a hardened lawman and made him into a husband, a father, and a better man than he ever thought he could be." "We made this life together," Beatrice corrected gently, looking around at their gathered loved ones. "Stitch by stitch, day by day." As twilight settled over the land they had both come to call home, Vincent and Beatrice stood on their porch, his arm around her waist just as it had been that day long ago when they watched the Miller boys depart. The West had changed in those 25 years, growing tamer as railroads, telegraphs, and civilization pushed ever further into once wild territories. But the love that had bloomed unexpectedly between a Boston schoolteacher and a frontier lawman remained as strong as ever, a testament to the fact that sometimes The most beautiful transformations come from the most unlikely materials, shaped by willing hands and open hearts.